Hey there, Quentin. Hope your month and your year are going by pretty painlessly. Unfortunately, I don't have a ton of time to record this month, which is why you don't see me in my normal, background. Part of that is because I'm really busy playing Jedi Survivor and getting just absolutely bodied by a frog. Anyway, here's everything I watched in April 2023.
Gaming Cookie Guy
Entertainment.
On April 6th, I opened my movie watching month with none other than the smash hit, the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Mushroom Kingdom, here we come.
Mushroom Kingdom, here we come.
Wahoo! So this movie's been out for like a month now, and I don't have anything really new to add to the conversation. I know when it first came out, critics were pretty mixed, if not pretty cold on the movie overall. And that's more or less to be expected. It's a Mario movie. It's not the greatest thing that's ever come out, but I think it's pretty fun throughout. It's not the greatest Mario movie that could have been made. Therefore, I'm not super optimistic for the rest of the franchise, but that's not really what they were trying to make with this one, and I think they were successful at what they set out to do. Now, I will say, I didn't absolutely love this movie. I think there's plenty of other better versions of this that could have came out, but on my way into the theater to watch this, up ahead of me walking into the theater, there was a little boy, probably like 6 years old, and his dad walking in. And you know how kids, they just like bunch up sometimes and just vibrate with excitement? That is what this kid was doing. He was so excited to watch this movie, and that's really what this is about. Like, it's all worth it just for that kid to see the Mario movie that he would want to see. And so that makes me happy. I'm glad for this movie existing. I'm glad for its success. I hope we get more out of, this universe is what I assume they're building towards. I give the Super Mario Bros. Movie, directed by Michael Jelenic and Aaron Horvath, a 6 out of 10. This is my lightsaber. There are many like it, but this one is mine. After that, I got busy prepping for Disney World, so I took one of my longer movie hiatuses, had a good trip, came back, and on April 16th, I just kind of rewatched something that my parents had on at the time, which was Living, which I saw at the end of last year. And despite seeing it pretty recently, I was, again, magnetized by this movie. I think even more so than the first time. I think it actually works better on rewatch, if I'm honest. Really, I just think this is a movie that never goes out of style with its message. And so I give Living, upon rewatch, an improved 7 out of 10. On April 17th, I watched the movie that has been sweeping Japan and finally made it over to the United States, Makoto Shinkai's latest, Suzume. I will admit I was a bit underwhelmed with this one. I've seen Shinkai's last 3 movies, and I think since Your Name, there have kind of been diminishing returns with all 3. And I hate to hold that against this movie, but, I kept watching it and I couldn't help but draw a lot of comparisons between this and his last work, Weathering with You. There's a lot of similarities. And when you put those similarities in your movie, they're going to get noticed. I also thought, compared to the last 2, this one had, all 3 have, mystical or fictional rules that each world follows. This one had the least clear rule set, in my opinion, which for me makes it harder to get invested in the story if I don't know, what is at stake from scene to scene. Now, I know I'm ragging on it a bit, but it was not bad by any means. It's just not exactly, it's not everything I was hoping for it to be. Regardless, I will say, as long as it hasn't already been spoiled for you, there is one thing in this movie, at least one thing in this movie, you will have never seen in any other film before. I give Suzume, directed by Makoto Shinkai, a 5 out of 10. On April 20th, I did another rewatch, this one within the span of just a month. So I've now seen Tetris twice. And I could say I really, really just love this story. To the point where I think I have to raise this up a spot. And Tetris is going to be, at the moment, my favorite movie of 2023. On rewatch, I give Tetris, directed by John S. Baird, an improved 8 out of 10.
Tetris. I don't get it.
It's a combination of tetra, Greek for four, all the game's pieces are variants of four, and tennis.
Tennis.
On April 23rd, I clearly was trying to make up for lost time, and so I watched 4 different projects on the same day, and now I have to talk about all of them. The first of those being the finale of the new Netflix series Beef, starring Steven Yeun and Ali Wong. Now, I did really like this show, but good Lord, did it stress me out at times. Like, it was impossible for me to just binge this show in one sitting, because there were times I had to physically just like throw my phone across the room out of my face, just out of stress. This show is an excellent example of ramping things up over time, whether that be comedically and dramatically. And it has an excellent cover of Incubus's Drive by Steven Yeun. Speaking about the finale episode specifically, without giving away spoilers, I think it gave everybody what they wanted, but real homies know that the end of episode 9 was the true series ending. Overall, I do recommend this series, especially if you're already a fan of Ali Wong or you just want something totally different. I give Beef, and that is all caps, Beef, directed by Hikari, Jake Schreier, and Lee Sung-jin, a 6 out of 10. So after finishing that show, I knew I needed something a bit lighter to fill out my day, something still on the comedic side. And so I was able to check off something that has been on my watch list for quite a while, a movie called Celeste and Jesse Forever, starring Rashida Jones and Andy Samberg. Despite its 2 incredibly likable leads, this is your fairly standard rom-com. They do a couple things to break up the formula that I don't want to spoil. Some of it works, and some of it doesn't for me. I think this movie, ironically, like a lot of relationships, starts off really strong. I'm really enjoying what we've got going on, but it just cools and cools to the point where it gets a little bit stale for me. I, so to speak, fall out of love with the characters and, by extension, the movie. I give Celeste and Jesse Forever, directed by Lee Toland Krieger, a 5 out of 10. I immediately followed that up with the 1999 Best Picture winner, Shakespeare in Love. While I'm happy I got to check this one off my watch list, I have to say I didn't absolutely love Shakespeare in Love. It's a weird thing because, honestly, I found this movie to be predictably cliche, and it's partly cliche because the subject matter it's covering helped to establish all said cliches, so it's like a historical and cinematic Ouroboros happening. It's very strange. Not a bad movie. I don't really know what audience and critics saw in it at the time to make it the Best Picture winner. I guess it just reinforces that, the Best Picture winner is just something that won at the time. It may not stand the test of time in that way. And so I give Shakespeare in Love, directed by John Madden, a 4 out of 10. And yeah, I know it's not that John Madden. I'm sure I'm only the billionth person to make that joke, but it nonetheless is still so funny to see Raiders coaching legend John Madden at a chalkboard with X's and O's directing Gwyneth Paltrow. Airport. Finally, to cap off that night, I rewatched a movie that has been at the very top of my rewatch list for some time, Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. I'm keeping that take. Screw it. Now, I can't speak to future generations, but this being a Best Picture winner, having just watched Shakespeare in Love, which was also a Best Picture winner, I feel like this is one that would stand the test of time better. At least it has so far. Who's to say what we'll think about this in 10 to 20 years? I will admit, I'm just endlessly impressed with this movie on pretty much every level. Technical, directing, acting. This just blows me away. The only kind of knock I can give this movie is that I'm so busy being impressed by it that I'm not always involved like emotionally with the characters. I'm just like in awe of everything that's happening on screen without actually absorbing it. But I mean, if that's the criticism, then like it's a really good movie. This movie is very, in small part, about what it takes to get a good review in Hollywood, and they did it. They did the things they needed to do to get a good review out of me. And so I give Birdman, or The Other Thing, directed by Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, a 10 out of 10, making it the latest addition to the 2023 10 out of 10 club. On April 27th, I came back to the series after having been disappointed with the last installment, and I watched Violet Evergarden, the movie. I mentioned I was disappointed with the last one, partly because I felt like it was just more of a TV special. Like, yes, it was feature length, but it didn't have the movie tag on it. And so I thought going into this one, okay, this is the movie, though. This is where they went all out. This is going to give me exactly what I wanted out of a feature length Violet Evergarden product. And it didn't. I don't know. The least interesting part of Violet Evergarden, the series and now the movie, has always been for me Violet herself. I kept waiting for them to make her more of an interesting character to me, and it never happened. I thought finally the movie was going to do that, and it didn't. She's always been the least interesting thing. Everything going on around her has always been so much more engaging. And yes, she is used kind of as a foil to those things. But for once, I wanted her to be the star of her own movie. I don't know. There's one more feature-length special after this called Violet Evergarden Recollections. I'm sure at some point I'll watch that, now with expectations that I'll never really care about this character, which is unfortunate, but at least now I know. I do want to reiterate that everything going on in this movie outside of its title character is actually really interesting to me, which is ultimately why I give Violet Evergarden, the movie, directed by Taichi Ishidate, a 6 out of 10. Ishidate? So many difficult names this month. Dang it. I got all these wrong. All right, we're now to the part of the month where I ran out of time to write a script. And so I'm going pretty much off the top of my head for the first time in one of these. So we'll see how it goes. On April 28th, I watched the grand finale to the Star Wars saga, which is now just a footnote in the greater Skywalker saga. I watched the theatrical re-release of Return of the Jedi. So I haven't seen this movie in full since I did like a full series watch before watching Force Awakens in 2015. And my memory of it wasn't the greatest. Obviously, I remember this being the weakest of the original trilogy, but I didn't remember a ton of bright spots. So I went into this actually kind of critically. I really wanted to see if there was something great in this that I had forgotten. And pleasantly, I was surprised. This is actually a solid movie. I thought that the Endor Ewok stuff would drag this down more than it did. Now, don't get me wrong. That was rough. That's not a great way to end a trilogy, in my opinion. But it's not nearly as bad as my memory served it to be. I don't know. Star Wars, man. Like, do I love it or do I hate it? I can't tell a lot of the time. That's the weird thing about being a Star Wars fan, or at least my experience with being a Star Wars fan, is I love the world of Star Wars, but when it comes down to the individual stories, I think they're just lacking in a lot of ways, and I want them to be great, but they so rarely are. Return of the Jedi, while it, is this epic conclusion, I still watch it and I see so many ways it could have been improved. And maybe that's just me watching it in 2023. I'm sure for its time, it was even better. It was more amazing. I'm so glad I got to see it in theaters. There is something just intrinsic about sitting in a theater and hearing that opening title crawl theme by John Williams start. There is something that just flips a switch inside of me. and tells me you're watching a Star Wars movie. So that's nice. It's always nice to recapture that feeling. And so despite, all the complicated emotion that goes into watching Star Wars, now Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, I do give it, directed by Richard Marquand, not George Lucas, I give it a 7 out of 10. And finally, the last thing I watched in April, I watched on April 29th with a couple friends, just getting together with your bros and watching one of the most depressing movies of our generation, Manchester by the Sea. One of my favorites, but truly is sad. And when I say sad, I think some people, like people who haven't seen this movie, get the impression that it's like a The Notebook. Like it's a heartwarming kind of sad. It's this sadness that builds up to one crescendo, one catharsis. Oh, that was sad, but it was so satisfying. That's not what I mean when I talk about Manchester by the Sea. It is a deeply permeating, depressive sadness. It is truly a sad movie. I don't know how else to describe it. It just is. I recommend it, but go in knowing that it might just ruin your night. It might ruin your week. There is a realness that comes across on screen that I almost never see in any other film. That's why for a long time I said this was my favorite movie of all time. I could still make an argument for that. I wouldn't say it is now, just because it's hard to sustain carrying a torch for something that depressing. But I truly do think it's a great movie. However, like this has to be the, going on 10 times I've seen this now. And there does come to be a point where not that it loses its weight, but just that it becomes too much. Like it's too punishing. And so for the first time in a long time, I'm not going to give this a perfect score. I give Manchester by the Sea, directed by Kenneth Lonergan, a 9 out of 10. But do know, I do truly love this movie. I need to take a break from it. And so that is everything I watched in April. I probably would have more to say, but I didn't write an outro. So, May's coming up. It may be as short of a show as this one was. Because, there's not a ton coming out in May. You got Guardians of the Galaxy. You got Fast X, which I may or may not see. I haven't seen the last couple Fast and Furious movies. And you also have, I'm playing Jedi Survivor, and you have Tears of the Kingdom coming out. So there's a lot of video gaming coming up in my life, which I haven't had time or reason to do lately. So that's kind of nice. Not that I'm pivoting this to a video game channel, but I might talk about them some if and when I finish those. I guess I'll see you then. Wahoo! Wahoo! Wahoo!